Hey folks, welcome to Friendly Orbit, the podcast that draws us together no matter how far we fly. I'm
I'm
Ceres.
Theia, and I don't like the old initiative rules.
Okay. um, I'm Ceres, game guru extraordinaire, and you already heard who I was joined by today. Um,
We're
we're
changing
gonna be
the rules this episode.
we're gonna be talking this episode about game design. What's game design? Game design is how you make a game fun and interesting to play. It's a form of entertainment, but it relies on creating a rule set for a game instead of doing entertaining things in the moment. Are we experts on game design, Thea?
We might be.
Not even a little bit. Um, we don't have it.
Who's to say, really?
We don't have degrees in game design. We haven't made any games. Technically, I did make a board game once, and I gave it to a few friends, and they liked it. But you know what I mean? I didn't sell a game.
Yeah.
I made a basic prototype and shared it with friends. But we do make a lot of homebrew, right? And TTRPGs, I feel like the GM often has to act a little bit like a game designer because their goal is
We
not
kind of mod
necessarily
games. Yeah, we kind of modify games.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like a GM in a TTRPG often is trying to create environments that produce interesting and fun dynamics, which is extremely similar to what a game designer does, right? They also create rules to create an environment in which entertaining dynamics happen.
Yeah, and I
So,
think it's worth adding here that game design, like you're really talking about like the game design in terms of the rules, but like game design is also level design and developing a storyline that interacts well with like game mechanics. And those are all parts of game design that, as the dungeon masters, we have to keep doing over and over again.
yeah.
Like, we may not have written the rules, but we have to design stories and bad guys and levels and maps. That's all game design.
Yeah. And so this episode is just about three cool sort of lessons I've taken from game design that I've experienced in the last year or so that I think are fun to talk about. So I'm not a game design expert, but I listen to some of their podcasts and I do some of it myself.
Roll the intro.
Ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff.
All right. Step one. First tip on game design, something I've seen TTRPGs in particular to do a lot more of, is look at the why of variance. So I challenge you. Let's ask ourselves the questions. Why do games have variance in the first place? Why is not every game like chess?
Well, in general, variance tends to add replayability value to a game. It also adds variance that kind of offsets the skill level when it's a competitive game. Like
Yeah.
in chess, chess is a bad family game because if every evening the family gathers around the chessboard, the little kid will never win a single game.
Yep.
But when we play more family-friendly games, the usually that involves a lot of dice rolling, then the kid has a chance. Sometimes the
Yeah.
kid has just as much of a chance as everybody else.
So I think those are great points, right? It equalizes skill imbalances. It creates unknown scenarios, right, which increase the replayability of a game, right? The game doesn't always unfold the same way.
Yeah.
I think those are good points, and I think uh, it's also just such a convention of games at this point. It's such an often used tool, variance or randomness, that it might seem core to any game, especially TTRPG, to always include variance. And I think that that's a mistake. So imagine you're being a mini game designer, you're coming up with a magic item, right? And the magic item can heal somebody for a certain number of hit points. I think the first instinct, just from everything else you've ever experienced, like in D&D, for example, right, is to have it heal some number of dice worth of hit points, right? Um, and I think you should resist that instinct. I think you should look first at um, a flat value that is maybe modified by some amount of variance. But the question is basically that you should ask yourself is when you include variance, why you're including it. And I've seen a few games do this, right? Uh, Draw Steel does this, for example, limits variance, right? When you roll for an attack, instead of simply using a uniform distribution, which are like common and easy to do in TTRPGs, is like the baseline of everything is just a uniform distribution. It's like, how much damage does this deal? 1d8, right? How likely am I to attack? Roll a d20, right? And then like see if you go above a certain number. That kind of uniform distribution I find has too much variance, right? Is too unhelpful. There's if you deal 1d8 damage, right? You can deal 8 times in one scenario and you can deal 1/8 in another scenario, right? And that's a huge swing in variance that's often not fun, right? Imagine like Monopoly, right? This is one of the annoying things about Monopoly often. You want to move on your turn, you roll a 2 or you roll a 3, right? Which is so far under baseline that you don't make anywhere near the progress that other people do around the board. So one of the ways that Draw Steals mitigates this, right, is
That
they
is the
still have
only issue with Monopoly, right?
no. There's other issues with Monopoly that actually we might
No.
get into later on in the episode. Um, but so
All
like
right.
in Draw Steal, right, the power roll is designed in such a way that the outcome of what you do is random, but it's random on a table, which lets the designer very well sort of place these 3 bands of results, right? So that the lowest result doesn't have to be 1/8 of what the highest result is. Instead, you can have an escalation that goes something along the lines of 2, 3, 4, right? Meaning that the highest result is about twice as large as the lowest result, and then the middle result is somewhere in between the two, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Also, if I remember correctly, the power roll is 2 dice, not 1 die, so it's not a uniform distribution.
that's true, yeah, and that creates more consistent results, which I feel is also appropriate, right, for TTRPG when you're acting a certain skill. The least likely outcome and the uh, uh, sorry, the least likely outcomes should be the extreme outcomes, right? And the most likely outcomes should be the average outcomes, right? And so that's another way that a uniform distribution fails you because again, in a uniform distribution, every outcome is equally likely. On a die 8, you will roll a 1 just as much as you will roll an 8, right? Even though these are kind of outliers. In an ideal world, I think it's more fun for players when they generally roll around a 5, right?
I think the correct comparison is you roll a 1 just as often as you roll a 5, because the 8 and the 1 are the outliers that you want to be equally unlikely,
Yeah.
and the
Well,
5 it's the number that you want to actually be more likely
yeah,
than 1
exactly.
and
You
8.
want the center value to be higher. You want the average value to be more
Yeah,
common. You want the less
yeah.
average values to be
And to be
more common.
clear, I would like to interject here. We're talking about like making a choice rather than presuming, kind of like making the assumptions that because all games pick the uniform single, like 1 to 20 roll or 1 to 8 roll, then that we shouldn't just assume that that's the better way. Instead, these ideas like having rolling 2 dice or not rolling dice at all, just having a number that is consistently the result is better. But
Yeah.
I think on the other side, rolling a 1 to 20 uniform distribution, I think can also be fun in the appropriate time. And I wouldn't argue that one is always better than the other, but that like the effects that you generate from it are very different. Just to bring an example from Dungeons and Dragons, where I feel like rolling a uniform distribution is the correct choice, is the Sorcerer's Wild Magic table, because the
Yeah.
Sorcerer's Wild Magic table is designed to evoke the idea of anything could happen, big swings, And so
Yeah,
in that
exactly.
case, I think that like the flat distribution serves the purpose of the design. So
I
yeah,
totally agree,
I
right?
really don't want to, I really don't want it to feel like, or say that one is strictly just like the correct one, but that depending on the feeling you want to evoke, these are two different tools that you can use to evoke different effects.
I think that's a good point, right? The way that I phrased it in my notes was that a uniform distribution is a sometimes food, right? It's not that it's bad, it's just that you don't want to be eating it every single day, especially for things that are kind of normal in the game, things that are reliably supposed to happen. So Monopoly, this would be moving, right? In D&D, this would be making an attack roll, right? Having a distribution where extremely unlikely outcomes are actually just as likely as moderate outcomes, and extreme outcomes are hugely variable from one another, right? That like a 1 is 8 times lower than the maximum on the 8-sided die, which is the 8. You know, that makes the uniform distribution kind of spicy, let's say, right? It's kind of it's a sour tangy ozone. It's not something you want to throw on everything, right? It's something that you want to use when you want to evoke that feeling. But when you want to evoke the feeling of something reliable, such as moving in a game, right, or engaging with the basic actions of a game, then often just a flat die roll is like not the right choice, because it
Yeah.
makes your game kind of a little bit in a crazy town, right? Where like, oh, anything could happen, which is actually not fun. If at any given moment anything could happen, right? You kind of do want to have some amount of agency in how you're working in this, and I think we see that more and more in TTRPGs, that they don't embrace anymore as much just the raw uniform distribution die roll. Games these days have more and more modifiers in them.
Yeah, I
That
one thing that I want to just like bring up.
mm,
I think in Monopoly you roll two dice. That's
you
the
do,
Monopoly I grew up with. So
you do.
you
You
know,
roll
just
two d
because,
six.
yeah, exactly, yeah, just because I didn't want one of the many members of our huge audience to go like, actually, so
The point is that 2d6 still has far too much variance, right? Like the thing that stabilizes the variance on the draw steel power roll is only partially that it's 2 dice. The main thing stabilizing the variance is that it's only 3 different outcomes, and that the worst outcome is not very bad, and that the best outcome is not that much better. I mean, it is better, right? It's like maybe 2 to 3 times better, but it's not 8 times better. It's not 10 times better, right? Than the baseline outcome, right? In D&D, for example, if you miss an attack, you get 0 damage, which means that the maximum result you could get from D&D and the minimum result you could get from D&D when you make an attack is literally infinite multiples apart, right? Which obviously is a facetious way to kind of look at it, because, 1 point of damage is not infinitely more than 0 points of damage. But the point is
I
that the
mean, strictly
disparity is
speaking,
high.
it is. But again, it's being
Yeah,
facetious.
exactly, right? Like in terms of
Like
actually mattering to your win
it's
percentage in the
not
game, right?
infinitely. It would, yeah, I think it's infinitely much. It's infinitely more percentage, but it's not infinitely better in the game.
Yeah, exactly. It's
It's
not
just like,
infinitely more impactful, right?
yeah,
Um so the point isn't just that like the uniform distribution is bad. It's that you need to identify what the variance is that your design produces, and you need to make sure that it's in service of the vision that you want. Many new game designers, or like many novice DMs inventing items for the first time ever in D&D, I do make a mistake that I see often, which is they're not confident about what the expected value is that their item should produce for an effect. For example, they're not confident how much an item should heal or how much damage it should deal or something like that. And so they just slap a random die on it and kind of call it good enough, because the die sort of hides the variance, and it doesn't, to their mind, make kind of an explicit statement about how much damage it should be dealing, right? Because you could roll high or you could roll low. I think that's a mistake, right? The correct thing to do is to identify what the baseline should be, either through experience or looking up reference values, and you shouldn't add fake variance just because you're scared that your design might be bad, right? Because it
yeah,
just makes your design too variable. And one of the common
yeah.
things you see in stories where people have broken homebrew is that the homebrew has like this really, really low floor and this incredibly high ceiling, right? And it's an unfun experience because you're you're wedged between uselessness and godlike ability. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting, and yeah, it's good points that you bring up. I think that in general, if you want to start homebrewing stuff for like a game like D&D, you know, go and watch that Matt Colville YouTube video about dice math. It's like 40 minutes, and you don't need to bring in a lot of, if not a lot of mathematical knowledge. It's actually a video made for people who aren't very good at statistics, to kind of give you a gut feeling for like what it means to pick a certain die or to increase a DC in terms of probability.
I didn't
So
know this existed.
yeah,
That's
it's. I
cool.
mean, yeah. I mean, listen. I don't think that you will get much from the watching it. I watched it. I thought it was going to be more interesting than what it was. But you know, Matt is a good entertainer, so I had a good time, and I was doing microscope stuff anyway. So
So, an example that I've mentioned to you before, Thea, but that I wanted to bring up for the audience of the exact kind of scenario where I feel like someone didn't want to commit to a baseline number, and so they just threw dice in instead, was a random encounter table set in a jungle, where one of the options you could roll was 2d6 velociraptors. Um, and in this story, um,
yes. Oh.
and it's the scenario where 7 velociraptors is probably a fair fight, and 2 velociraptors is a very unentertaining fight. Why would you ever put the party up against that? And 12 velociraptors is simply too many to be a fun fight, right? And so why use dice? You're just opening yourself up to two unfun scenarios. Just because it's random doesn't mean it's inherently fun. If you want evidence for that, just look at like life in general. Life has a lot of chaotic randomness in it that we can't explain and can't avoid, and most of the time people feel that it's not fun being
Yeah.
being exposed to random chaos, right?
Yeah, it's like when people say, "Yeah, well, life is unfair. Suck it up," and it's like, "Well, life is unfair. Isn't that shitty? Shouldn't we do something about it?" And in
Shouldn't we do
games,
something?
we can literally do something about it.
Exactly. So as the story goes, and this is just like something I saw online, right? So who knows if it's fully true, but as the story goes, the DM rolls 12 velociraptors, which happens about 3% of the time on a 2d6 roll, right? They roll for 12 velociraptors, then they roll for all 12 velociraptors, they roll a 1d20 roll for their initiative. They roll a nat 20, and then they roll
Insane.
one attack roll for all 12 velociraptors. The idea is like this one roll determines how well every single velociraptor hits, and they roll a nat 20 again, and then the party dies. You know?
Yeah,
And
it's
beyond like a lack of common sense, I feel this is a clear scenario where where the DM was not asking themselves, and the person who wrote this wasn't asking themselves, what does the variance serve in this scenario? You know? It was
yeah,
just variance for variance's sake, right? Not considering, hey, if I roll 1d20 for all 12 of these guys, that means if I roll a nat 1 the first turn, nothing happens. That's not very
yeah,
fun. Or if I roll a nat 20, everyone dies, which is extra not fun. So maybe I just shouldn't do that. Maybe I should roll individually, even if it takes more time. Or
yeah, and
say
like
roll one die for every 3 velociraptors or something like that.
yeah, and these tables are really, really kind of show also just like there is, they put a lot of pressure, as you said. Like there's common sense here to be had as the dungeon master, and like they really kind of rely on the idea that this is a good product because even if the table is bad, there's a human being that if you roll 2d6 and get a 12 will say no. And I was going, now I will be facetious and say I wonder if in Baldur's Gate 3 the code rolls some dice to generate an encounter, and then it's like, well, you have to fight 4 Death Knights.
Yeah, exactly. It's 1d4 Death Knights, and I rolled 4, unfortunately, so you're just fucked. Yeah, exactly, right? So if you look at how professional game designers do it, right? When they design a level, the number of monsters is rarely up to chance, and when it is up to chance, it's up to chance under some complicated computational function that is meant to produce only positive outcomes, right? Something way more sophisticated than 1d4 of this boss monster plus 2d6 of goblins or something, like some
Mm-hmm.
weak monster, right?
Yeah.
Level design and where enemies place is something that's done with very particular care, because it's actually, there's a narrow range of fun. Kind of like how for some board games, there's a narrow range of the number of players that it's fun to play the game with. The game says it's playable from 2 to 27 players. But most of the time, we often know this particular game is only really fun with 4, or only really
Yeah.
fun with 5. I
Is there
encourage you to think
is there a name for a certain zone between extremes where the conditions are just right enough?
where the conditions are just right. They're not too extreme and not too extreme in the other way.
Yeah,
They're
it's not
just
too
right.
hot, it's not too cold.
Yeah. So basically, that's a good point, right? When you're designing your game, consider what the Goldilocks zone is, right? What the Goldilocks scenario is, and consider if variation from it is fun. And if variation from it isn't fun, maybe you shouldn't design your scenario to include that variance, right? So
Yeah.
if you have like this cool idea for a battlefield in which random magical effects take place, right? And you have a die roll, and it's like the die roll is for whether or not the magical effects take place. Think to yourself, is it fun if we have this magical battlefield and the magical effects just never happen if I roll badly the whole fight? Or think to
Yeah.
yourself, is it fun if they happen every single turn because I roll well every single time? Right?
Yeah.
In general, I encourage you to view variance almost as the enemy.
Yeah, I
Imagine in every
definitely.
scenario that you don't roll average, because much of the time you won't. So run through the scenario in your head thinking, what if I roll nothing higher than a 10 all session? Does my scenario, does my rule help with that, or does it hurt with that, right? Imagine
Yeah.
I only roll 17 and higher this session. Does my rule help with that, or does it hurt with that?
Yeah. Can I bring up one more example for this, and then maybe we'll move on to your next principle?
Sure. One thing I still want to do is briefly go over some mechanics that are common in TTRPGs that are used to hedge variance. Just so people have some ideas in mind for things that they can use.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, no, for me, Dix, what happened to me once, I designed this monster that is supposed to be like the sniper devil. You may remember it from Edge of Extinction.
I remember it.
Ceres. Yeah. And I wanted this devil to have like an attack that they could use basically like only once per encounter, and then they had to use up an entire turn basically reloading it if they wanted to shoot again. So it was extremely costly, but like if they hit, they did a significant blow, right? And so like appropriately like measured for the level of my players, but it was like you don't want to be hit by 2 of these.
Yeah.
And then I used it for the first
2
time.
of these, we might say, would be catastrophic.
Yeah,
for a
and then
character to be hit by.
exactly. And then it loaded, aimed, and shot, and I rolled a natural 20. And I was like, "Oh no!"
Oops.
I was like,
let me quickly roll my 40d6 here.
Exactly, and it wasn't 40d6, but it was an inane number of dice. Because in my head, I had also picked a lot of small dice to roll, so it would be a consistently deadly shot.
Yeah.
But what I hadn't accounted for this was the d20. So what happened then is, because the way of D&D crits work is that you double the dice, but you don't double the bonus. So I reduced the dice a lot, and I just applied a massive bonus with no explanation. By the rules, like, yeah, this attack has a plus 27 to the damage. And and then you roll 2d6. That's the modifier on the on the thing. So yeah, that's my bad experience with variance.
So what are common mechanics to hedge variance? Tables, right? Or numbers you need to roll over, which is just a hidden table, right? But something that produces 2 outcomes where it's like, yeah, I know you rolled a natural 20, but like that's a success. And it's not anything 20, better than a success.
Natural 16. Yeah, it's like a 16 and a 20 are equally good.
Those are both success, right? And it's like, oh, you rolled a natural 1? Well, that's a failure, which is equally bad as an 8, because that would also be a failure in this scenario, right? So that kind of thing, those tables, they can help smooth out things. And I think that's also, the D20 is sort of the natural enemy of newbie DMs. How many stories have you heard about like, oh, I rolled a nat 1, and so the DM made like the devil appear? That's like, the worst possible scenario happens. So like the literal devil appears to me, or
Yeah.
something like that. And
Yeah,
it's like,
wait, I was trying to climb the rock. Why has death come to pluck my soul?
exactly. Why did I
What's that?
choke to death from rolling nat one on drinking my coffee? Right? So
Yeah.
that's one thing, right? Is to just be like, look, failure is failure, success is success. And, if you get over this number, then you get success. And if you roll on a number, it's failure. But you kind of decrease the disparity by using a table. That can be one trick. Another thing games do is you roll multiple dice. The more dice you roll, in case you don't know this is how statistics works, the more uniform distributions you combine, the more they become a more reliable distribution over time, right? So 7d8 are going to roll much more consistently than 1d8 because average outcomes become much more likely. Another one is advantage. Advantage and disadvantage mechanics, if you're familiar with 5e, although at this point many games are integrating the idea of advantage and disadvantage mechanics, getting to roll 2 dice and keep the higher one, or having to roll 2 dice and keep the lower one, that can help skew a uniform distribution into a distribution that has a little bit more consistency. And the last one is just use a flat modifier. Draw Steel really opened my eyes to this. You roll to attack, and then you look at the table, and it does 3 damage. And it just says there it does 3 damage. It's not 1d4. It's exactly 3, because 3 is the right number. 3 is the fun number in this scenario. So I encourage you can have a magic item that just heals someone for 10 hit points. That is legal. There's nothing inherently wrong about it. There's no inherent fun you're necessarily missing out on when you have a simple healing item. Because who likes to roll low on healing items? And does rolling high on healing items feel so much better than rolling low on healing items that you would want to take that negative case into account for the positive case? I would
I feel like
argue,
I feel like we're also bringing up healing a lot because healing is something that you need to occur reliably.
yes.
Like if you hit the monster for like 1d8 plus 2 and you roll a 1 and you deal 3 points of damage to the monster, you're not gonna feel very cool.
Yeah.
But if like you're dying in a fight and the cleric heals you for so little that you die, you go down again before it's even your turn,
Yeah.
then that doesn't just like feel bad, but like that risks compromising the entire fight.
Yeah. Exactly. I think healing is a great example of something that you need to consistently happen, and so variance is not as appropriate for it as it might be for something else. So, final conclusion, be considerate with your variance. When you need it, feel free to use it. When you don't need it, try to be aware of it. Try to identify when you don't need it, and feel fully free to not incorporate variance where it's not appropriate. Your monster doesn't need to heal 2d6 hit points at the start of every turn. It can just be 7. That's allowed.
Yeah. Can I confess something?
Absolutely.
I was
This
20
is the
when I
perfect place for a
realized.
confession.
Yeah, I was 20 when I realized, because no one will ever listen to this. I was 20 when I realized for the first time that like the Goldilocks zone was named after the fairy tale in English, because I didn't grow up with the fairy tale in English. I just thought that it was like a scientist called Goldilocks.
I love
I
that.
know it's so obvious from like a native English speaker point of view, and it's so not obvious for anyone else. And in case it isn't obvious, I'm not a native English speaker, dear audience.
I love that. I love that, though. We should use that for some kind of world building, right? Some like fairy tale sci-fi world, and be like, this is Dr. Goldilocks. She is identified. All right, you ready to go to tip 2?
Hit me.
All right, tip 2 time. I call this the result scale. I think that, barring few exceptions, there is a scale of results that should be the outcome of player actions, and that using this scale is key to making your game more fun. So
You are
when
being very cryptic.
I
You mean
am.
like success makes success failure, or like success with a consequence?
Yeah, so
Okay.
I'm trying to explain it broadly before I hone in on a specific idea. So when a player takes an action in a game, it's normally they're trying to achieve whatever the goal of the game is. They're trying to make progress towards it. And you can sort of think of a progress scale of sort of, they make a lot of progress, they make moderate amount of progress, they make little progress, they make no progress, they make negative progress, they are set dramatically behind, right? That, I think, sort of in a rough sense encapsulates basically all the experiences that can be the outcome of a player's action in a game, right? In terms of how much it helps them towards their goal. And I think when you're designing a game, you should exclusively stick to the first half of the scale. I think when a player takes an action in order to further their aim of getting closer to a goal, in particular in TTRPGs, the bad outcome should be you only make a little progress. Why? Why do I think this? Well, it's first off, it's just something that I see is more and more common in games. One of the things that commonly designates games from today from games of the past is that games in the past often are more punishing. And games today, it's sort of like you kind of always have something to do and you're never fully out of the game. And having played modern games and games from the past, I find modern games more fun, specifically because of this, right? There's nothing more frustrating than taking a turn attempting to do what the game is asking you to do and have the game say, fuck you. Not only do you not make progress, you set yourself so far behind, you can't win from this point anymore. You can play the rest of the game, but someone else is going to win it, not you, right? So,
Yeah, I think
um,
I think like my only note here, and this is really like being nitpicky, but I
mhm,
think that in TTRPGs, it's if the if the player wants to do something that is like clearly really stupid, and the dungeon master has advised them about what a huge risk it is if they fail at this. If in the story the outcome of you have put yourself at an infinite like
yeah,
negative progress on this thing. I think I think what you're talking about games that you can win. You're talking about like competitive games maybe, but like games that are following a story like D&D. I think that again, I'm being nitpicky, but there are situations where as the dungeon master, you should really make it clear to your players that they're setting themselves up for a huge risk, maybe even a huge risk for not that great of a reward if they roll well. But
yeah,
if that's what they want to do, if they want to tell the king to give them the crown, the classic example of
yeah.
the bard tries to convince the king to name him king instead, you know then you can, after you've done all the warning, if they still want to go through with it, they can roll, and if they roll the natural 20, then the king is amused, and
And if they roll
eh,
anything below, then the king locks them away.
exactly, if they roll really poorly, they're dead, game's over.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think there is nuance here, right?
Hmm.
But in and I do think negative things should happen in games. I do think there should be setbacks in games, but ideally, the setbacks in the game are rarer than the steps forward in the game. Have a rationale to them as to why they have occurred. Uh, Generally haven't occurred from accidental player action, and an ideal scenario somehow embody the will or the strategy of the bad guy. Either the bad guy is the people you're competing against, right? Or the bad guy is the communal villain that you as a team of players are trying to defeat, right?
Yeah.
But the more of those principles you start to violate, the more it becomes I missed my attack roll, and I rolled a natural one, so I drop my sword. And I think that that's very unfun because you're supposed to attack. And so the punishment is, well, you rolled badly, so now you're set back. You're further back at the end of your turn towards your goal of defeating your enemy than you were at the start of your turn. And I think that that is very unfun and is something that people often reach for when they're new to game design. They're like, okay, I guess if this doesn't work out, something bad should happen. So I guess the bad thing is I don't know, this negative thing happens to you. And then if you do succeed, something positive should happen. So the positive thing that should happen to you, okay, this positive thing happens to you. But I think you're viewing the scale wrong. You should avoid nothing happening because it's boring,
Yeah.
right? There's videos and videos out there on people talking about the idea of like the null result, right? This is a big Matt Colville thing as well, right? The null result is you do your turn, you roll bad, nothing happens, right? The null result
Also,
is
like the
deeply
scale. Yeah.
No, you go.
I would say also the scale is like the scale for player action, like in general, should go from like you don't advance or you advance very little or you advance but there's a complication or something to you just succeed because so many times the things that go wrong outside of player action, right?
Yeah,
Like as the DM, you have infinite potential to make good and bad things happen. But because of how stories work, usually it's good when the players make the good things happen on purpose and the bad things happen to them not because of them.
yeah,
So
they happen
as the
because of the
dungeon
bad
master,
guy, because of the setting,
yeah,
right?
exactly. So like it's kind of like the dungeon master has the scale that goes from things get worse to things don't get that bad or things maybe get a little bit better, kind of like by themselves. And the players operate on the scale of like you haven't done much progress to you have achieved something positive.
Yeah, I mean,
Like the dun
like
no
here's
that I
here's
finished my thoughts.
yeah, sorry. Um, yeah, no, I agree with you, right? Like, basically, what you don't want to do is you want the players to consistently make progress so that the bad guys can consistently make progress so that we're all kind of going somewhere. I imagine this fight, right? You run in and you swing your sword at the goblin and you roll low, so low that in this game there's a rule that says then you drop your sword. Then
Hmm.
the goblin goes to attack you, but the goblin rolls so low that it drops its sword. You spend your next turn picking up your sword. The goblin spends its next turn picking up its sword. You attack the goblin and you miss. The goblin rolls and it rolls a crit and it kills you. I mean, it's
Yeah.
infuriating just to speak it aloud, right? This sort of two steps forward, one step back, then another step back, then maybe two steps forward, then two steps back again. This kind of dynamic is not fun and is a waste of everybody's time because really we know like the players they want to make progress, they want to move forward. We know that ultimately even with a null and even with negative results at the end the game will kind of shake out towards some kind of conclusion, right?
Hmm.
So let's just get to the conclusion and let's just get there quickly and let's let player agency matter in that rather than this kind of like strange bingo between like really devastating negative results and really overwhelming positive results.
Yeah.
There's a note here I
Absolutely.
also want to add is that I think sometimes people use negative results because they think it makes players care more. It makes them feel something. They think to themselves, "Oh, what would be exciting? Oh, yeah, like a really overwhelming advantage. And what would be frightening? Oh, well, something really bad happens to you." And so then they design an effect where, like, if you do it right, you get this really overwhelming advantage, and if you do it wrong, you get this really negative effect happen to you. And I think that's too much. I don't think they're wrong. I think that does make characters care more. It does make players care more. But you know what? It's more than many people can handle. How many times have you had it that somebody playing Monopoly has rolled poorly 4 turns in a row and then lands on an expensive hotel field and it's too much for them and they quit the game, or worse, they ruin the game for everyone else by starting an argument or by literally destroying the game board, right? Like we've all had these scenarios like happen or close to happen in our lives in especially in old-timey board games where the variance gets to someone and it's too much and it's too intense and they can't handle their emotions and their feelings regarding to the game state anymore, right? Having negative results on your reward scale can really make characters care, but it can make players care too much to the extent that they burn out on your game, that they stop having fun. I don't want to. I keep feeling pain whenever I engage with the game the way I'm supposed to. And yeah, there's also really, really high highs that go with it, but that just leaves me wrung out at the end of the evening. You know what I mean?
I see it. I mean, with Monopoly, it's very very obvious, and I'm also reminded me of like the times in like Risk. I guess this is
Mm-hmm.
more a point for the earlier point, but yeah, like when like you move into like a country against a country that has like 4 tanks, and you have done the card thing where you have like 15 tanks,
Mm-hmm.
and then you still lose,
Yeah.
and the other guy is like having the time of his life, and you're feeling like an idiot,
Yeah,
or
and you
you're
can't
feeling
handle it,
cheated by the
right? And
game.
it's just it
Yeah.
gets too much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so no, I mean, I get it. Like this kind of applies to both things, but yeah, I think it's an easy mistake for people who play TTRPG, especially the people who are more leaning more on the like the math side of things, who are may have more of a who may be more like mathematically inclined to
Mm,
get the idea that the game, that the role and the scales of the effect need to be kind of like symmetrical.
yeah, it needs to
But like
balance
you
out
have
in the end.
to, yeah,
That's what
exactly.
balance
But
is, right? If I
yeah,
miss, you get
exactly.
+5 hit points, and if I hit, you take 5, and it's balanced.
Yeah, and like these like many like most games are like a lot more about the psychology of things, right? Like unless a game is purposefully designed for like perfect symmetry, like a chessboard, and a
Mm,
chessboard, I'll note, has no variance. The
yeah.
scale of the effect there is entirely in your hands.
Yeah.
But in games, especially in games with randomness, maybe that's also the thing, right? We need to kind of like merge these 2 points. That
Mm,
like the problem of the scale of effect is compounded by the by having a game with high variance. Because in chess, if I get a really bad result and I lose my queen, usually to a certain degree that's my fault, and
yeah.
to one minus that certain degree, it's the achievement of the other player. So at the end of the day, in a competitive game like chess, I can't really complain if I lose my queen to anyone other than myself. And I
But
have
getting
similar
heavily punished
feelings.
by the result scale for a mistake that isn't even yours, simply is the
Exactly.
variance of the dice, is
Exactly. If I
doubly
roll the die.
infuriating.
Exactly. And like, yeah, I'm also thinking of like that game that I brought up, Scythe.
Mm,
Scythe has a very low variance.
yeah.
Very, very low. Almost never. Like there's only one mechanic that influences that is influenced by variance, and that's that if you go to certain places on the map with your like faction leader, you get to draw a card, and the card will give you like a flat bonus of some kind.
Yeah.
And then the variance is that the bonus can vary from card to card. And there I
Yeah.
will note the effect is only positive, because no matter what card you draw, you're never afraid of rolling something, of drawing something bad. You're always getting a little some goodie out of it.
I think you're right. Like, I think the 2 points are connected, right? Like, if you look at what's good about the power roll, right,
Hmm.
in Draw Steel, one of the things that's good about the power roll is that the result scale of it is only positive. There is no
Yeah.
null result on the power roll. You are always going to make progress on every turn towards your goal of winning the fight, and the bad guys will always make progress. We don't waste anybody's time with these empty turns where just nothing happens because, hey, you rolled low, and that just somehow feels appropriate. That when you roll low, you don't get to make any progress towards
Hmm.
your goal, even though you used the correct strategy and you did everything else correctly.
Yeah.
Um, I feel in some way this is also just a variant of the sort of game design maxim, which is that punishments are not as interesting as rewards, right?
Yeah.
Um, Limiting a player, saying, actually, you don't get to play the game, is not inherently as fun as if every mechanic of the game is pointed towards, actually, no, you do get to play the game and you get to experience it. And if you do poorly, you just get to experience it less, right? Like you make less progress, but you still get to play the game. Right. I kind of
Yeah.
misspoke there, right? It's not that you get to experience it less. You get to experience it just as much as anybody else, but you simply don't make as much progress towards the win condition, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, your train is chugging along slower, not like you don't get to even have the experience of the train moving, right? Because you're
Hmm.
still stuck
Yeah.
in the coal refueling stage of the game or whatever.
Yeah. No train for you. Yeah.
No
All
train
right.
for you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It should be slower train for you, right? But you're
Yeah.
you're still we're all playing trains together, right? Nobody's stuck back at the station, right?
Yeah.
Just because.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah. Right.
Uh
Yeah. I think that puts a nice bow on this topic, also kind of connecting into the previous one. I don't have a funny confession for this one.
Yeah, I don't really either. Just like, man, how many old games really don't do this? Like Monopoly, where it's just like, I know I don't want to roll a 5. I've identified that I'm most likely to roll a 7. I've done the best thing I could to position myself. What do I roll? I roll a 5. Fuck. I landed on the hotel.
Yeah.
God, do
Also,
I hate this
Monopoly just
game.
like, yeah, also Monopoly just like, okay, 10 turns in. I have understood that I will not be winning this game, but it looks like I'm stuck here for another 20 turns. How
Yeah.
joyful.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing, right? I mean, in an interesting, like, what is an interesting race? A race between two combatants who make a variable amount of progress every turn, or a race where, like, one combatant might just stop or literally crash and, like, not have the ability to win anymore? You know, as much as that seems exciting when you're thinking about the effect, you're like, oh, this will be really, each turn will be super exciting because, you know, you might get totally fucked on the turn if you don't roll well. That's not
Yeah.
exciting. It's scary. And then once you do get fucked, it's boring. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like if you're into that, just go gambling.
Ex- I was actually thinking about this, right? Yeah, do you know, like, gambling really fucks people up because it does play with the whole scale, right? You
Yeah.
lose a little bit every single time that you fail, and then, like, when you win so big that your brain is just, like, flooded with dopamine. And I think that is maybe part of what messes people up with gambling, is that the highs and the low are so extreme that it really, like, you know,
Yeah.
uh, winds you up like that. All right.
Yeah. All right.
Last tip. Last tip. I don't think this one's really connected to the other ones, but it's called use the whole toothpaste tube. So, uh, I played a game a while ago called Cult of the Lamb, and Cult of the Lamb is a very interesting game. It's a video game,
Oh,
and
yes,
at
I
the
want to try
start,
that.
it has two elements to it. The main element of the game is it's sort of a roguelike dungeon crawler game where, you know, if you die, you go all the way back to the start of the dungeon and you go room by room by room and you fight enemies with your weapons. You find upgrades and cool things over time, but at the end of the dungeon, all your upgrades and stuff goes away, right? And then you return back with whatever you've gained. And so it's a roguelike dungeon crawler. It's a little bit like the Binding of Isaac or, you know, like other similar games of that variety. Um, and that's the main half of the game. But there is a second half of the game. And the second half of the game is interesting because it's completely different genre. The second half of the game is a base builder game where you recruit followers and you build up your cult and you build up like your stone manufacturing and your wood manufacturing. And then you can ritualistically engrave stone and wood to make higher quality materials, and you find gold, and you upgrade your church and you perform bigger and badder and more unethical rituals on your followers, and you build new farming plots and you upgrade your farming technology. And so, you know, it's a base builder game. And there's something really cool and interesting in the start of the game. The base builder part of the game is very limiting to your progress, and by the end of the game your base becomes so powerful that it's basically that part of the game basically disappears. The base building becomes so powerful that you have all the money you could ever need. You can unlock all the technologies you could ever want. You have all the spirit power you could ever need. Every ritual in the game is available to you. You can have as many followers as you want. Your followers, many of your followers, will never die or age from old age and stuff like that. And it's really, really cool because you start out the game feeling like crap, and you end the game feeling like super powerful. And that's what the story of the game is you slowly ascending to godhood. So I think that this shows a valuable game design trick, which is as your game progresses, the game should change. And at the start of the game, it's fun that the base holds you back. And towards the end of the game, you have such mastery that it's fun that the base building part of the game goes away. And if you're worried about balance, you'd be like, what? No, the end game is totally broken. It's totally busted. It's not even really a game anymore because there's so little challenge to it, right?
Hmm.
But that's the point. The point is that because the difficulty level of solving the base building portion of the game decreases over time, it makes you feel like a god, which is what the game is trying to do, right?
Yeah.
So, like, it means you get really powerful and meaningful and interesting upgrades as time progresses, right? The designers of the game knew the base building portion of the game would not be able to grow infinitely and keep you entertained forever. So they didn't try to make it like that. Instead, they decided to just use up all the toothpaste in the toothpaste tube such that you get meaningful upgrades over time that eventually invalidate the base building portion of the game. And eventually the base building portion of the game is not relevant because it's not supposed to be.
Yeah. I mean, I have. Uh, I'm thinking now, like, there are. Recently, I've been at your place and I've played Civilization.
Mm,
And in Civilization, also, like, while all the statistics of your civilization are all kind of always the same from to end to the game,
mm-hmm,
the ones that you have to look after change based on when you are in history. Like,
mm,
for a majority of the game, happiness is an important metric because it determines the rate at which your empire can grow and expand.
mm,
And then at some point, when the modern era kicks in, like, there are social policies that you can achieve that you kind of have to take, that they
mm.
just make the happiness problem go away. They give you
Yeah,
copious amounts of happiness. And then that's just something you don't have to care about anymore, because also at that point, expanding your rule by, like, founding new cities is really not something that you're going to do much as you would do it in the first part of the game.
yeah,
And the game becomes a lot more about, like, conquering the entire world, which requires a lot of happiness. Or
yeah,
it becomes about influencing other countries with your massive tourism. In the beginning of the game, tourism, you don't look at it for half of the game because it's
yeah.
basically functionally always zero. But then suddenly it springs to like 300. And now that's an interesting mechanic. And the happiness mechanic, we don't really care about it anymore.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but like basically not having to care about happiness anymore opens you up to care directly about the various win conditions of the game, which is what the last phase of the game is about. Is each culture trying to find their win condition and winning as quickly as possible via it.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
So this is something that I also noticed in Magic the Gathering. For anyone who's ever played Magic the Gathering before, it's generally either a four-person free-for-all game or a 1v1 game. But it's played in short rounds, right? It's not like a TTRPG or a video game. It's played in short rounds, and every round is completely independent from one another. And one of the things I always thought was impressive is how powerful you can feel in Magic. You can get to a point where you realize my game state is overwhelming, right? Like my enemy cannot win this game anymore. I have built up an advantage which is insurmountable. And the game gets to do that because it's played in rounds, right? The game has to end at some point. The game is not afraid of letting you achieve an overwhelming advantage that can no longer be defeated because they know that that can't be produced every single game, right? That's the point. You can't produce that overwhelming advantage every single game. And then, the games where you do develop that overwhelming advantage, then the game ends, and you start a new game and you get to start again. So Magic the Gathering, for example, is a game that is aware of how long its toothpaste tube is and is not afraid to use up all of it, right?
Hmm.
So what is a game, what is a because I've talked about positive examples, let's talk about negative examples. What is a
Yeah, I
game
was going to
that is
say, like,
afraid of using up the entire toothpaste tube?
Are you
I
about to say
think
Dungeons and Dragons?
Well, actually, I think older versions of Dungeons and Dragons are among them. I think 5e is a little less like it. I think also often this is something that you see in older Pathfinder versions. You get this dynamic that people call treadmill progression, which is basically every level or so, you get about +1 better at hitting, and every level or so, enemies get about +1 harder to hit. And so at the start of the game, you're rolling and you have +5 and you're trying to hit a goblin with an armor class of 13. And by the end of the game, you're rolling with +23 and you're trying to hit not a goblin, a schmoblin demon, which has an armor class of 23, right? And
There's a
effectively, it's
meme
the
of
same
like a
game.
guy. Yeah, there's a meme like I don't know if you know it. It's like an old timey illustration of like I don't know if it's Robinson Crusoe, but it's like a guy on a beach like fighting crabs with a rock.
Yeah.
And then they made like like this is like RPG at level 1 and then RPG at level 70 and like now the crabs are purple and the rock is glowing.
Exactly. I know exactly the meme you mean. Yeah, exactly. That's the exact dynamic you want to avoid, right? A game that has, it's also something I sometimes refer to as like levelitis, where it's like the game pretends that it's giving you progress, but each level is so incremental in the amount that it changes the game that it doesn't really feel like progress, right? I think, and this is a preference, obviously, I think games are better when the upgrades you receive in them are meaningful and change the way the game works. They either change what the dominant strategy is, or they change the complexity of the game. They change the emphasis of the game. They change the game mode, right? They change the narrative of the game, right? I think in particular, use the full toothpaste tube is incredibly important for narrative games because narratives that feel like they're stuck in the same loop forever get tired and boring, right? Who wants to watch a movie where the middle part of the movie just seems to drag on and on and on and nothing is changing? Nobody
Mhm.
wants to watch that movie, right?
Yeah.
Narratives thrive off of change. And so, especially games that are following a narrative, like Civilization, right, which follows the narrative of a developing culture, or like Cult of the Lamb, which is a narrative driven game, or like D&D, which is a narrative given game. What is important at the start of the game should probably change throughout the course of the game, and your mechanics should reflect that, even if that means that there's parts of the game that become completely trivial and obsolete, such as gold management. I think is a great example. I think at the start of the D&D, the amount of gold you have should matter. I think at the end of D&D, if you are still tracking gold, you're crazy. That should not be relevant to high level adventurers, right? They should be beyond that on some level. So, yeah, use
Yeah.
the whole toothpaste tube. Like, I don't get so worried about This is sort of like an issue I find maybe with like level 2 DMs, right? DMs who have a little bit of experience with homebrew, but maybe not a lot. And so, like, they have the experiences under their belt of broken homebrew, right? And so they want to get good at balancing the game. So they're super, super focused on balanced, but they become so focused on balance that basically they build items that just like can't change, right? They create this progression that can't be broken, right? It's like infinite progression awaits. Yes, infinite meaningless progression in which the crabs only get purpler, right? And your stick only gets glowier awaits.
Yeah.
Which honestly sounds worse than purgatory if you think about it.
Yeah, it's like Sisyphus. If Sisyphus got to like put a sticker on his rock every time the rock falls down,
Exactly.
you
Like,
get
look
to
how much
pick.
progress I've made.
There's an episode of Black Mirror about this.
So, yeah, those I think that pretty much summarizes it. Those are my 3 game design tips. Be aware of why you're using variants, and use it to achieve your goals instead of just using it as a conventional genre default, so to speak, for games. Um, be aware of the reward scale that is the product of players' actions, and try to focus it somewhere between small amount of progress and large amount of progress instead of centering it on 0 or including negative results. And lastly, when you're designing a game that is supposed to change over time, don't be afraid to use the full toothpaste tube, right? Don't be afraid to have certain mechanics become obsolete by the end of the game. Don't be afraid to give people upgrades that change the fundamental nature of the game. That's what progress feels like, and it's very rewarding and it's very exciting.
Yeah. Okay.
Awesome.
Awesome. Yeah. Great
Those were
episode.
just some cool tips that I came across. Do you have any comments? Anything you want to plug?
Anything I want to plug? I'm still watching Severance. Still very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you gotten to the goat plot yet?
I have only gotten to the first contact with the goats. I had to kind of like go back and loop back because I have to restart it with Copernicus.
I see.
Yeah.
I never
I'm on the
got that far,
treadmill.
but I heard recently about it online, and people were talking about this cryptic goat plot that was ununderstandable. So I'm curious because
I
you're good at teasing out those kinds of things. So I'm curious if you can eventually explain the goat plot to me.
I hope I'll be able to one day to come here on the pod and talk about goats. Until then, I will plug. Hey, now that Civilization 7 is coming out, I bet Civilization 5 is much cheaper. Yeah, I mean it's old. It's a classic. I think Civilization 5 is kind of like one of those milestone. It's like a milestone in the progress of civilization games
Mm.
for sure. And if you're interested in those kind of games, I think that if you buy Civilization 5, you have to buy the Brave New World expansion, which is a lot of fun.
Mm.
Adds mechanics like religion, adds a bunch of like depth to like the late game
in terms of
Mm.
ideologies, add the tourism mechanics, redefine some victory conditions. It's really good, and I think that it has replayability, which I think is the one of the problems of the base game, is that it
Mm.
doesn't have a lot of replayability. I think Brave New World adds replayability, and I don't know, it also has a little bit of a nostalgic feeling for me, so I will not deny those allegations, but I like it very much.
Yeah, I Civilization never really got me like it gets other people. I really like the narrative of it. I'm not as into the whole strategy of it though. And at their core these are strategy games. So, I think they're just not for me at the end, and that's not a
Hmm.
criticism of the game. But uh I always kind of keep coming back to them because I really like how you can make your own narrative, about how the politics between Poland and I don't know some African the Zulu. Yeah, how about how the politics
The
between the
Zulu.
Polish and the Zulu determined the outcome of who developed internet in this world, right? And like
Yeah, I
these
mean, that's what
false
happened in my
histories.
last game. That's what happened in my last game.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
these false histories that are generated, right? I find so interesting and compelling about Civilization. When
Yeah.
the actual strategy, I often can't wrap my head around. I prefer strategy games. I think that have like less moving parts. Not necessarily that they're
Yeah.
simpler, but just that they have less mechanics, and so I get
It
overwhelmed by Civ a
definitely
little bit.
takes the time to master, right? Like when I played
Yeah,
Civilization in the beginning, I was very much to kind of doing the same thing over and over again.
yeah,
And I cranked up the difficulty and became more familiar with the game. I started to
mm,
become more conscious of the choices that I was making, and I was more able to plan ahead, like what kind of civilization I wanted to be and what my long term game was. For example, in this game that I started recently, the one that you were kind of alluding to,
mm,
I decided very early on that I would entertain good relations with my neighbor Poland, and that I would pursue a culture or diplomatic victory. And
mm,
that's what I did. And for the most of the game, it worked out. I did stuff like brokering a peace between the Zulus and Poland because I didn't want
mm,
Poland to get conquered. So I paid the Zulus a lot of money
yeah,
for them to make a peace, stuff like that. And those are definitely things that I wasn't doing in the beginning. So I totally hear you in terms of like in the beginning, they're like the barrier, the entry barrier to really master the game is high.
yeah. I'm going to plug Cult of the Lamb. I already talked about it a little bit, but I think it's an excellent game. In particular, if you are the kind of person who likes the idea of roguelike games, but has never fully gotten into one and is a little bit intimidated by the difficulty of moving around a 2D map and, evading all these enemy projectiles and enemy attacks. If you are intimidated by that idea, I think Cult of the Lamb is an excellent entry point because the game starts and is mostly a base builder, and you really get to ease into the higher the dungeons start off really easy and they end really hard, and the base building starts off being the limiting factor and ends up being really easy. And so there's always these two fun halves of the game. Even if you completely mess up a dungeon, you can come back to your base and have some fun doing some easy base building gameplay, and then you can get back into the dungeons. And then by the end of the dungeons, when the real challenge is there, you've had a long time to get into it and to get used to it and to get comfortable with the idea. And I think it's a game that's really great at teaching you how to be good at it. And you really get a lot better as you play it. So I had a ton of fun with Cult of the Lamb. I played the hell out of it. I had a lot of fun with it. So I would highly recommend it to anyone who's even only a little bit interested in roguelikes, especially if you've been interested in roguelikes but scared that they're too tough for you to master somehow. So, yeah, that'll just about do it for episode 27 of the podcast. You can find us on YouTube and on oh fuck, I've just messed it up. If you want more, you can find us at youtube.com/@a-friendly-orbit, as well as Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you happen to have any astral echoes you want to share with us, you can email us at afriendlyorbit@gmail.com. All one word.
All right, Ceres, I'll talk to you later. And to all of our fellow Voyagers, we will catch you out there amongst the stars.